Good afternoon, everybody, and I welcome you all to Masterclass in Spine. Thank you very much for taking your time off to spend an hour with us every week. So, Masterclass in Spine is a weekly online lecture series which will go on till the end of April. We're covering a whole range of topics in spine. The recordings of our sessions are available on a link, and I share the link on those WhatsApp groups for the benefit of those who have not been able to attend the previous sessions. So today we're going to be talking about spinal deformities in children, and so there are two types of spinal deformities that we see. Number one is called scoliosis, and the other one is called kyphosis. So my talk today predominantly will cover scoliosis. Kyphosis is a little rarer, but the fundamentals and principles of treatment remain the same. Before we start off, I'd like to request all of you to mute your mics and your videos, please. Thank you. So scoliosis is defined as a lateral curvature of the spine more than 10 degrees. So that's the definition of scoliosis, and it's always associated with a rotational component also. So there are two types. There is a structural scoliosis and there is a non-structural scoliosis, which may be due to a limb length discrepancy or a pelvic obliquity. So you can get a bend in the spine as a result of this. But today we are going to be talking predominantly about structural scoliosis, and this is what it looks like. So a bend in the spine. So it is important to be able to identify these children early so that they can access treatment early. Can I request you to put off your videos, sir? Dr. Nitali, can I request you to put off your video, sir? Yeah. Thank you. So when you look at a child with scoliosis, can you switch off your video, sir? Thank you. So how do you diagnose scoliosis clinically? So when you look at a child with scoliosis, what are you looking for? There are a couple of things that you will look for, and these should not be missed. So number one, when you look at the child or the patient from the back, the head should be right on the pelvis, number one. If normally the shoulders are at the same level on both sides, and if the shoulders are at different levels, it may indicate the presence of scoliosis. If there is a rib protrusion or a rib hump on one side, it indicates the presence of scoliosis. And if there's asymmetrical waist creases, so you can see that the waist here is more deeper and here it's more straighter. So if the waist creases are asymmetrical, it probably indicates the presence of scoliosis. So this is what we should not miss. The other one is called it's a school screening test. It's called the Adams test. You get the patient to bend forwards, and normally when you look at the patient from the back and when he's bent forward, the rib cages on both sides are at the same height. But if the rib cage on one side is more prominent, more protruded than the other side, then it's probably a result of scoliosis. So this is called the Adams forward bending test. It's used as a school screening test for scoliosis. And the reason why the rib looks prominent is once the vertebra, with the bend in the vertebra, I also told you that there is some amount of rotation of the vertebra. Because of the rotation of the vertebra, the ribs on the convex side tend to stick out like this. And this is what causes that obvious rib hump when they bend forwards. So this is referred to as the rib hump in scoliosis. Now, once the child has been clinically suspected to have scoliosis, ideally they should have an X-ray of the whole spine standing, posterior, anterior, and lateral. So there is no point in getting X-rays of the spine, thoracic separately, lumbar separately, because for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's difficult to measure the curves. Number two, invariably these kids come with X-rays in the lying down position, which does not give you the exact magnitude of the curve. So ideally, they should have standing X-rays done. They should have PA and lateral X-rays done. If you do not have access to standing X-rays, please send them to a center that does standing X-rays of the whole spine. So that includes the head and the pelvis. So don't, as general practitioners, it's not necessary to get any more tests done other than an X-ray. And if there is a bend in the spine, then you just refer them on to somebody who treats scoliosis. So not all neurosurgeons and not all orthopedic surgeons treat scoliosis. So scoliosis is surgeries and scoliosis management is carried out by only few people. So please make sure that you're sending them to the right person. Some of these patients may require MRI scans, but that would be decided by the person who's ultimately treating the patient. And on the MRI scans, I normally specifically ask the radiologist to look at the CV junction, the craniovertebral junction. Ask them to look at cord anomalies and whether there's any tethering of the spinal cord at the lower end. So I specifically mentioned this because otherwise the patient will come back with an MRI report that says there is a scoliosis in the spine, and that we knew from the X-rays anyway. Patients with congenital anomalies or congenital scoliosis may benefit from a CT scan also. So these are the things that we do. So X-ray, MRI, and CT scan. There are some terminologies in scoliosis. Number one is the Cobb's angle. So the Cobb's angle is a measurement of the magnitude of the curve in the AP X-ray. So you draw a line along the upper end of the upper end vertebra. There's the first vertebra in the curve, and the lower end of the lower end vertebra, the lower vertebra in the curve. And the angle subtended by these two lines is called the Cobb's angle. Now, Cobb's angle is a very rough measurement of scoliosis because we know scoliosis is a three-dimensional deformity, and the Cobb's angle is a two-dimensional measurement of a three-dimensional deformity. So definitely there are some weak links in using Cobb's angle alone as Cobb's angle alone to make any treatment decisions, but it gives you some idea of the magnitude of the curve. Number two is what is the end vertebra? I told you already. There's an upper end vertebra and there's a lower end vertebra. These are the first two vertebrae that move into the curve. And the apex of the curve, the vertebra that is most translated from the midline, is called the apical vertebrae. It's important to know which is the apex vertebra because scoliosis, the terminology for scoliosis depends on the apex of the vertebra. What kind of scoliosis do you call it? Depends on the apex of the the location of the apex vertebra. So nomenclature, like I said, depends on the apex. If the apex is in between T1 and T11 vertebra, it's called a thoracic scoliosis. If it is between T12 and the L1 vertebra, it's called the thoracolumbar scoliosis. If it is below the L1 vertebra, it's called a lumbar scoliosis. And if it is between C7 and T1, it's called a cervicothoracic scoliosis. So it is important to know which vertebra is maximally translated from the midline. That vertebra is called the apex vertebra, and the location of the apex vertebra gives you the nomenclature. So the curve is defined as per the location of the apical vertebrae. The other thing to remember, and this is very important, is that scoliosis in children is a painless condition. So if a child comes with scoliosis and pain, you should be very, very careful because scoliosis is not normally associated with pain. So you need to look more carefully for other causes that may be causing the pain and the scoliosis. Now, coming to the etiology of scoliosis, they can be broadly divided into three different types: a congenital scoliosis, an idiopathic scoliosis, and others. In others, you have two main groups. You have the children with the neuromuscular scoliosis as a result of cerebral palsy or poliomyelitis or muscular dystrophies. And then you have the syndromal scoliosis, which is because of Marfan syndrome or neurofibromatosis type 1. So these are rarer. The more common ones are idiopathic and then probably congenital, but should not miss out on the neuromuscular and the syndromal scoliosis because some of them tend to progress quite rapidly. So coming to congenital scoliosis is due to a congenital anomaly in the vertebrae itself. So the vertebra is not formed properly, or it's not segmented properly. So if it is not formed properly, or only part of it is formed, like this hemivertebra here, it's called a hemivertebra. Only one side, only one part of the vertebra is formed. It can result in more growth on this side and less growth on this side, resulting in a congenital scoliosis. Sometimes little more of the vertebra may be formed, but it results in a wedged vertebra like this, which also can cause scoliosis. Sometimes the vertebra may not segment completely, and you have something called an unsegmented bar on one side. Now, this side does not grow at all, whereas this side continues to grow because there is partially segmented, and that can result in a very severe form of scoliosis. And sometimes the whole vertebra, multiple vertebrae do not segment across multiple levels. That results in a block vertebra, and these do not progress very rapidly or may not progress at all. So it's important you pick up these children very early. Some of them may have a tuft of hair on the back like this, which is an indicator that there is some problem occurring in the spinal cord also. Some of them may have a shoulder elevation like this, which is a condition called strangle shoulder, wherein the scapula is located slightly higher than normal, with a limitation of the abduction of the arm. So it's important as clinicians to remember that scoliosis is not an isolated condition, because congenital scoliosis is not an isolated condition because it happens in utero at the same time when some of the other organ systems are also forming. So they may be associated with anomalies in other organ systems also. So congenital scoliosis is associated with a 10% incidence of congenital cardiac anomalies, and all of children with congenital scoliosis should have an echo done. There's a 15% chance that you may have a spinal cord anomaly, either a diastematomyelia, split cord, or a distal tethering. And an MRI scan is used to rule out these conditions. And 20% of them have genitourinary anomalies. So we do an ultrasound abdomen and pelvis to make sure that the bladder and the genitourinary systems are. And the progression of congenital scoliosis has been very well documented by McMaster. So we know, based on whether there's a hemivertebra or an unsegmented part, depending on what the anomaly is on the X-ray, you can predict how quickly it is going to progress or whether it will progress at all. And depending on that, you can plan your treatment options. So some of them require surgery early. Some of them you can wait a bit, and some of them don't require surgery. So the ones with a double hemivertebra, the ones in the, so the double hemivertebra, the unilateral unsegmented bar, and the unilateral segmented bar with contralateral hemivertebra, these progress very rapidly and they require very early surgery. Whereas the single hemivertebra and some of the wedge vertebra may require spinal fusion at some stage, and the block vertebra usually don't require surgery at all. So that is congenital scoliosis. So the ones in red probably require surgery very early on. And it is unfair. We see a lot of patients coming in late with very grotesque curves because somebody has told them that nothing can be done till the age of 18. Those are stories that is not true anymore. That is probably true that was the belief in the 1960s. It's not true anymore. So if anybody has scoliosis, they should go and see a scoliosis specialist to prevent so that some form of treatment can be started off to prevent the curve from progressing. So treatment options for congenital scoliosis are many. Sometimes with multiple anomalies in the vertebra, when you're not very sure of whether it's going to progress or not, you can just observe them with X-rays done every 6 months to see whether they're getting worse. Number two is orthosis or a brace. Not a best option for children with congenital scoliosis, because we know that most of them do not get controlled with the brace, but you can probably use it as a temporary modality to prevent progression of the curves above and below, what they call the secondary curves. And So these are the three O's in treatment of scoliosis. Number one is observation, number two is orthosis, and number three is operation. And operation usually short segment fusions or some kind of growth guidance systems. We'll come to the growth guidance systems later, but we operate on children as young as 2 and 3 years old for congenital scoliosis. So don't tell these patients that nothing can be done till they're 18, because that's not because by the time they get 18, then they have curves which are probably inoperable. So this is an example of a young child with a hemivertebra on one side like this and a small curve. So early surgery resulted in complete correction of the scoliosis. This is another child, 3-year-old child with a hemivertebra at the lumbosacral junction. Had surgery with us at 3-year-old at the age of 3. Doing well now. She's around 6 or 7 years old now. Going to school and her spine looks straight. So we've covered the etiology of scoliosis. We know that some of them could be congenital, some of them could be idiopathic, where we don't know the exact cause. And then there's this other group which we refer to as others, which is neuromuscular and syndromal scoliosis. So that is one classification of scoliosis. The other one is classified depending on the age at presentation. So whether they are below 10 years or above 10 years. So below 10 years, they're called early onset scoliosis. These are difficult. This is the holy grail of scoliosis. So they are difficult to manage because many of them progress very rapidly, and they are difficult to manage because you cannot offer them the traditional fusion surgeries that we offer our older children. The reason why we cannot offer them the traditional fusion surgeries is because their lungs sometimes are not mature, the lungs are not developed, the thoracic cavity itself is not large enough, and long fusions, fusion surgeries at this age can arrest pulmonary development and cause cardiorespiratory issues in future. So these children, you cannot offer them the same surgeries that we offer the older children. So that's why it becomes a little more tricky. And so this is a graph showing the total number of alveoli formed with age. This is the segmental growth of the T1 to the whole spine that goes like this. And this is the mean lung. The green one is the mean lung volume in boys. So these are things. So we know that a majority of the alveoli form by around 5 to 6 years. And then the lung, so the alveoli develop and then the alveoli get bigger. So at that age, if you do a complete fusion surgery, like in the older children, the lungs don't mature as much. So they need a growth-friendly surgery that allows the chest to expand and the lungs to mature and the growth of the thoracic cavity to happen along with correction of the scoliosis. So we have few options for them. So we have something called growing rods. So these are rods that can be lengthened. So you fix them on top, fix them at the bottom, and then every 6 months you just extend the rods. And as you extend the rods, the spine elongates. So you're not actually fusing it, you're allowing it to grow. So these are called growing rods. We also have growing rods in the tibia and the femur. So these are spinal growing rods. This is another implant called the Vector. So wherein instead of, you can actually expand the rib cage itself. So Vectors are useful in some children with congenital scoliosis. So the problem with using growing rods is they require 6 monthly lengthenings. And now you have something more fancy. You have magnetic growing rods, wherein you don't have to operate on them and extend the rods every 6 months. You can do that by applying this magnet on them. And these magnetic growing rods will lengthen every time you apply this magnet. And you can adjust how much of length you want. So you can do this every 6 months to get some growth in the spine. So this is magnetic growing rods. What we normally use is a procedure called Schiller. So this is a 6-year-old boy who came and saw us. So you can see that he's got a very bad scoliosis. And if you leave it alone, or even if you brace it, it's not, the curves more, it was more than 60 or 70 degrees. And these curves don't normally respond very well to bracing. And this child was around 6 years when he saw us. So we did something called a Shilla technique. So this is what we did. And you can see we had some screws on top, screws at the bottom, and some screws in the middle. And these rods are not firmly fixed to these screws on top and the bottom. So it allows the spine to continue to grow. And this is how he look after surgery. So he's quite straight, but he's continuing to grow in height. And he's around 3 years post-surgery, and he's grown quite a bit. So children above 10 years, you can offer them the traditional fusion surgeries. And the most common cause of scoliosis in this age group is adolescent idiopathic scoliosis. This is what we see. Although the ratio of male to female for all curves is 1:1, females have a higher chance of having curves more than 30 degrees. So more severe curves are found in girls. The right thoracic curve is more common. The left thoracic, if somebody comes with a left thoracic curve in the adolescent age, you need to make sure that there's no spinal cord problems going on. And the options are 3. There's observation, like we mentioned before. For smaller curves, we just observe them with X-rays every 6 months to see if they're getting better. At this stage, we also advise them to have some physiotherapy. There's some scoliosis-specific exercises that can be done. Then there is bracing for curves which are slightly larger, from around 30 to 45 degrees. We offer them a brace along with some exercises. And if the curves are more than 45 degrees, they probably require surgery. These cutoffs that I mentioned are just very, rough guidelines. There are lots of other factors, including the age and the maturity, and lots of other things that are taken into consideration before deciding on the treatment. So bracing is not as easy as it looks. The braces need to be worn 23 hours a day, and compliance is a problem because we find that a lot of these teenagers are not quite reluctant to wear the brace. They're embarrassed to wear it in school, and our weather in India, hot and humid, really does not help. So, but bracing is an option. So different types of braces which are open in the front or open at the back. There are elastic braces available. So I normally give them a front open brace. I tell them to wear it for at least 22 to 23 hours a day. They take it off for an hour for bathing, showering, and things like that. But the rest of the time, even at night, they keep the braces on. So the question is, which are the curves that are likely to progress rapidly? So we know that larger curves, more than 40 degrees and with more rotations, progress very rapidly. If the child is young, below 10 or pre-menarchal in girls, they have a lot of growth potential left. And if there's a scoliosis already at that age, it's very likely that they will progress rapidly. Skeletally immature. So, you can assess skeletal maturity based on the fusion of the physis plate or the apophysis of the iliac crest or the acetabular cartilage. So based on that, whether the child is skeletally mature or not. Skeletally mature means it tells us whether the child has got more growth potential or not. And if they have more growth potential and they have a scoliosis, it's very likely that the scoliosis is going to get worse. So this is something that you need to remember. So maturity assessment is based on age, is based on this riser sign. I'm not going to go into it, but it's the form appearance and fusion of the iliac crest apophysis. There's also something called the Tanner stage. The onset of menarche is an important factor to be considered because most of the pre-growth velocity occurs before the onset of menarche. X-rays of the hand are useful in assessing maturity of the skeleton, and triradiate presence or absence of the triradiate cartilage on the pelvis X-rays also will tell you whether what stage of maturity, of skeletal maturity the child is at. So curve progression, we know that, small curves have less chance of progression, but larger curves, more than 60 curves, more than 60%, 60 degrees in immature children have 100% chance of progression. And curves 30 to 60 degrees also have a 90-degree chance of progression. So it all depends on how. So that's why for smaller curves, we observe them, and for medium-sized curves, we brace them, and for larger curves, we operate on them. The other thing to remember, and which was usually missed in the past, was there was a belief that once the child reaches 18 years old, the curve does not progress. This has shown to be untrue. So we know that curves more than 50 degrees at skeletal maturity, which is around 18 years old, can continue to increase by 1 to 2 degrees per year. So if a child reaches 18 and has got a curve of 50 degrees, it is going to get worse. So they should have surgery. So if the curve is around 20 to 30 degrees, then you can probably not offer them surgery, but observe them once in 2 or 3 years to see whether it's getting worse. But if the curve has reached 50 degrees at skeletal maturity, then it's likely to get worse. So I'm going to show you some pictures of children and what is done for scoliosis in in children above the age of 10. So this is a 10-year-old girl who came to us with a bad curve, 90-degree curve, and the shoulders were at unequal levels. The waist asymmetry was present, and this is what she looks like after surgery. So shoulders are level. She's got good waist creases and good correction. So that's a 10-year-old girl. This is a 14-year-old girl with a right thoracic scoliosis, very thin build. She's had a cardiac surgery in the past. You can see those sternal wires in front. And this is what she looks like after surgery. So she's straight, shoulders straight. So these kids, once they wear their normal clothes, you can't make out anything at all except the scar in the back. So this is a 14-year-old boy whom we operated on more than a year ago. So he had a neuromuscular scoliosis. So, and it was rapidly progressing, so much so that he was off balance and he could not even sit without using his hands for balance. So we offered him surgery, and that is what he looks like now. He is back on his feet, doing well. This is another 14-year-old girl whom we operated on this year. So she came with a very stiff curve of around 80 to 85 degrees. And you can see that the shoulders are at different levels. These kind of scoliosis you can't miss. I mean, from far away itself that she's got a scoliosis. The important thing is to catch these scoliosis early so that we can offer them some treatments early before they reach the stage. And this girl underwent surgery with us, and she's had a good outcome. Her spine is bang straight, shoulders at the same level, and she's doing well. So most of these children stay in hospital for 5 to 6 days. They're out of bed and walking in 3 or 4 days. They're out of hospital in 5 to 6 days. They're back to school in 5 to 6 weeks. And we tell them not to avoid, strenuous sports for 5 to 6 months. So that's how it goes. But they're back to school in 5 to 6 weeks. This is another 16-year-old girl with a 90-degree curve. These curves you can't miss. It's quite a large curve. And this is what she looks like after surgery, shoulders level. And that big rib hump on the right side has sort of disappeared. Another 16-year-old girl with a 70 to 80-degree curve, very stiff one. And, you can see that she's off. Her head is not completely on top of her pelvis. She's shifted to one side. It's called a coronal imbalance. And she underwent surgery with us, and she's looking straight. She's around 3 or 4 years post-surgery now and going to college, doing very well. She's back to all her normal activities. Another 18-year-old whom we operated last year. So he had congenital scoliosis. So there was some growth, some vertebral anomalies in the thoracic spine, and he was progressive. And so we offered him surgery from the back. And that's how he looks like after surgery. So it's had a good outcome. We don't aim to correct the curve 100%. So the main aim of scoliosis surgery is to prevent progression. Number 2, to perform a safe surgery. And the last one is to obtain as much correction as is safely possible. At the end of the day, the shoulders have to be level, the pelvis has to be level, and the head has to be seated on top of the pelvis. That's all that matters. Whether there's a little curve in between really does not matter. These are more severe scoliosis. There's a 20-year-old girl whom we operated on a couple of years ago with very severe scoliosis of more than 120 degrees. So for these kind of children, what we do is we admit them in hospital for 3 weeks. We improve their nutrition, improve their lung capacity with the spirometry, and we put them on some skull traction to see, to see whether we can get some flexibility out of the spine, and then we offer them, then we do the surgery. And you can see that post surgery, she's quite straightened out. She's very happy with the outcome anyway. And so this is my last slide. So the take home message is very important. It is that scoliosis can develop at any age, result of multiple etiologies. Very important to start treatment early, and don't wait till the child grows older. So don't tell children that nothing can be done till the age of 18. We operate on children as young as 2 and 3 years old, so that you can get away with a smaller surgery rather than a larger surgery when they're 18 or 19 with very bad deformities. One of the things that everybody is worried about with scoliosis surgery is there any risks with the surgery? Well, like any other surgery, scoliosis surgery does entail some risks. There is a risk of nerve or spinal cord injury. It's around 1 to 1.5%. So we use something called intraoperative neuromonitoring to monitor the health of the spinal cord during the entire surgery. So we pass some signals from the brain, and we pick up these signals in the foot, and then we pass some signals at the foot and then pick them up in the brain, just to make sure that the signals are passing up and down the spinal cord normally. So this is what you don't want to happen. So this is a girl who had a small scoliosis when she was around 10 years old. She was seen at many places, and she was told that nothing can be done till she becomes 18. And then she became 18, her parents brought her to Bangalore, and this is what she looks like now. She's completely inoperable. For many reasons, she's got a very bad deformity, and her lungs function has deteriorated so badly that she's not able to withstand a major surgery. So this is what you don't want to happen. So that is why I say, please refer them early for surgery. So I run a NGO called the Scoliosis Foundation of India out of Bangalore, and we try to help children. We try to increase awareness about scoliosis, and we try to help children from underprivileged backgrounds to access these big surgeries. So with that, I come to the end of my talk.